Looks like we're going live.
Hey, Mr. Pond,
A little music.
tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello, everybody. Bob Lust, the Pond Boss. It must be Tuesday. It must be 6:30. Let's go live and have a conversation. Let's have a little chit-chat here. Talk about some things. Bring some questions. You guys know the drill here, how we do it. So, click like, hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section, and share to your timeline. And you're eligible for a drawing for a Bird Dog Cup, which I didn't bring it in here. So anyway, hey. Oh, by the way, Jonathan Lusk, my son with Bird Dog, is working on some new cups, and they're going to be Yeti cups. These other cups are really, really good, but he's partnered with Yeti, he said, and that they're going to create some new cups. And we actually had a drawing, believe it or not. Kevin Matney is the winner. Hello, Corluz. How in the world are you? Kevin Matney is the winner, but I don't have his address. So, Kevin, when you see this, email your shipping address to info@pondboss.com. There's Jeremy Day. Hey, Jeremy, good to see you, buddy. I've been talking to Debbie. I think we're going to swing by and be able to see you, I think, on Sunday, but I just don't have that quite ironed out, but we're going to work all that out. Hey, tonight I thought I would talk about, Steve Sharp sent an email, and he's been digging back through some of the older videos, and he heard one or listened to me talking about the 4 different status points of a bass bluegill fishery. And he was asking me where it is. I have no idea. When I do these videos, dude, I'm random, you know, it's kind of like spontaneous. Samuel Jenkins, Deborah Corlew calling for 80 degrees this weekend. Man, yeah, it's almost spring, really. So, hey, how many of you got to see the eclipse? We got to see it right out the back door. We had like almost 2 minutes of totality. It was very cool. Hello, Wayne. Good to see you. Mike Cottrell, Danny Mack. You hit 90 degrees today. All right. You're finishing up last week's podcast. I am starting on this week's podcast. Hey, Kenny Sanderson up there from northwestern Kansas. Good to see you. Wayne, you got your fish in. There's Fred Bingaman. Fred knows the drill. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. That's it. There you go. So tonight I thought I'd start off the podcast, broadcast, Facebook Live, this thing, with the 4 different status points of bass bluegill ponds. Since Steve brought it up, I thought that'd make a pretty good topic. So what I'm going to hit it this way. The most common circumstance that we come across as fisheries biologists, in the private sector especially, are bass crowded ponds. Now, how do they get that way? Well, bass have a big mouth. They eat big meals, and they're top-end predators because of that mouth and their aggressive nature, just as a beast, because that's what they do. So it's typical that we find an overcrowded bass lake. And I'm going to tell you, over 45 years of doing this stuff, with 40 of those years pretty much focused on sport fish management in private waters, yeah, Wayne, I bet you did have a great viewing of the eclipse. Well, we did too. It was really stellar, and everything worked out perfect. No clouds. It was exactly great. Overcrowded bass. Anyway, I'm so distracted sometimes by cool stuff. That happens because the largemouth bass population overeats their food chain. Now, I'm going to circle back on all these and go into more detail about each one of them, so you can kind of see the situation at hand and what causes it. And that way you can try to help either prevent it or figure out what to do about it with your bass pond. The second one is crowded bluegills. I don't see that very often. And I tell you where I do see that. I typically see that along the Mason-Dixon line and north. So northern tier states are more tending towards overcrowded bluegill populations. And the reason is the bluegills spawn once a year. And they grow so fast that they often outgrow the mouth size of the bass, largemouth bass, that are the predators. Then the third one is the one we all strive to get, and it's a fleeting thing. It never happens. It's balance. So look at balance like a teeter-totter. When you got predator fish, prey fish. The predator fish are always trying to overeat the prey, and the prey are always trying to reproduce enough to not get overeaten. So part of your job as a manager is to seek balance. But I'm going to tell you this. Since fish eat fish and fish reproduce and it's dynamic, that means it's always on the move, balance is not possible for very long. Now, you can have it just for a little bit. Hey, there's John Funk. It's been a while, buddy. Good to see you. Mid-Michigan. Yeah, man. It has been a bit. You've kind of been hopping out there. I know you picked this up, later on after it's been broadcast and recorded. So glad to see you, man. So what's the fourth one? Well, I'm going to categorize that as everything else. Now, Dr. H.S. Swingle's the one that figured all this out way back in the 40s and 50s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Now, his deal, his is hello, Zep, Mark Finn from East Texas. Good to see you, buddy. So what Dr. Swingle did was he was charged and challenged to come up with ways to grow more protein for people to eat in rural America during the Depression. Because if you study that era, I mean, my parents were born in 1931. So my grandmother that I knew so well, she was born in 1902. She lived to 1988, so she made it to 86 years old. So she lived through the Depression. So what Dr. Swingle was trying to figure out is what do people have to do to take a farm pond, on their truck patch or whatever, especially in the Southeast, and grow more protein so they could have more food during some really, really hard times. So all of his work was to figure out how bass and bluegill interact, in a small farm pond. And those are basically the four scenarios. Bass crowded, he came up with this stuff, but I'm going to add more to it. Bass crowded, bluegill crowded, balanced, and everything else. Now, what is everything else? Let's scratch our heads and think about that. Hello, John Henry. Good to see you, buddy. Everything else is the fisheries adjusting to some stimulus or some issue. Let's take drought, for example. When there's a drought and the water draws down, the fish adjust their numbers and adjust their mass based on the amount of volume and space that they've got. So the bass and bluegill, for example, when the water drops down. Hello, Daniel Powell. Good to see you from North Cackalack, South Cackalack. Great to see you. Brent, Rutan, listening from the hill on the way back from the hill country to Waxahachie. I know where Waxahachie is. Waxahachie. So those circumstances those are transitional things. So like what happens during a drought is the fish are crowded and the big fish eat the small fish. Most of the habitat's gone, because as the pond draws down, there's very little habitat down in the deeper part of the lake, in most lakes. And so the fish compensate by eating each other heavily. But then what happens when the lake fills back up, then the population expands by everybody reproducing. When that happens, you can see the dynamics. It's really fun to see that because you can watch, actually as a biologist, you can go in there and see the variety of size classes of fish and age classes of fish after like an extended 2-year drought, for example. And then the lake fills back up. Now, if you're not in a drought, you're going to be, and every drought ends with a flood. You can take that to the pond bank. If you're not in a drought, you will be. Every drought ends with a flood. So when that pond fills back up, now the fish want to compensate again, and they begin to reproduce heavily. Another circumstance is a fish kill. Let's say you get into the summertime and you haven't had a good harvest plan, and the water level drops 3 or 4 feet. It gets really hot, and then you get a blue-green algae bloom or a heavy plankton bloom, and then fish start to die. Well, nature does not appreciate a void. So when those fish die and the water cleanses itself, which it does typically, after every fish kill, the water cleanses itself. Most fish kills, when you call somebody and say, hey, my fish died, what happened? They're going to tell you had an oxygen depletion. Well, maybe you did, but that's not the problem. The problem is what allowed the water quality to deteriorate to that point. Okay, and so there's another circumstance where you're going to have one of those transitional fish populations after a fish kill, because a lot of times not all the fish die, and the ones that are left compensate and they start to reproduce to fill the void. As such, nature doesn't like a bounty. So when you're managing a pond and you're feeding the fish well and you got a lot of fish growing, nature wants to help you consume that bounty. So predators show up, or the water quality deteriorates and you have a partial fish kill. Hello, Dick Tabbert, Joel Danauer from Louisiana, Michael Eric, Iowa. Dick Tabbert, nice to be back aboard. Yeah, good to see you, buddy. I'm glad you guys are all checking in. Let's see, what do we got? 28 viewers and 19 comments. Not one question yet. I'm going to stay with this topic because it's really pretty good and helpful for all you guys and gals. So, those are the circumstances where you're going to see a transitional fish population. And I come across that, maybe, I don't know, in 40 plus years, I probably come across that transitional situation 20 times, maybe, once every other year, where something happened. Hey, there's Gil Cannonberg. The Groons are checking in. Yep. Oh, you know what? The Groon Scots reminded me, before we get very far into this, I want to tell you guys that we've got the Institute of Higher Pondology scheduled. It's going to be at the end of May, 1st of June, like May 30, 31, June 1. So we've got, Jim, I did see the eclipse. It was spectacular. It was absolutely amazing. It got dark. Temperature dropped about 5 degrees. It was eerie, and man, I got a big lump in my throat just watching that thing, because I know I'll never see another one. And just fascinated by how it happened. So anyway, talking more about Scott. I know Scott wants to attend one of the Institutes of Higher Pondology. The one upcoming is going to be in about 6 weeks on the West Haven Ranch. It's great. It's really rustic cabins, cedar cabins, 15-acre lake, fun facilities, and it's $1,500 all in. That's food and housing and the whole bit. So, I've got room for about 5 more folks. So I need some of you guys to sign up. I promise you it'll be worth it, and I want to make the class. I promise you it's well worth it. Okay, let's see here. Dick Tabbert, I do have a couple of large dead fish in my mind. I figured they were just older fish. That could be. But if you have some fish die, I'd investigate it. If it's one fish and you can see a hole in it, a bird speared it, or a cormorant tried to get it, or whatever. So, if you do lose a few fish, I think you need to investigate that. Don't just blow it off. It might be a symptom of something to come. So let's go back to these other circumstances. Bass crowded. So how does that work? Here's how that works. Now you guys all know the 5 key points that I figured out over 40 plus years of doing this stuff. It all starts with happy water. If your water's not happy, nothing else matters. Okay, once you know that you've got good happy water. Now happy water, what is that? Happy water is water that the fish can live in and thrive in with being minimally stressed or distressed, where the pH is stable, where the water in, water out is not just gigantic flow rates and things. So happy water. The next part's habitat. As goes the habitat, so goes what lives in it. The third piece is the food chain. It takes 10 pounds of bait fish or 10 pounds of food at every trophic level of the food chain to get to the next level or feed the next level to grow to 1 pound. So it takes 10 pounds of plankton to grow 1 pound of insects. It takes 10 pounds of insects to grow 1 pound of bigger insects and small fish. It takes 10 pounds of small fish to grow 1 pound of predator fish. And so knowing that you got to have the right food chain, and knowing that when you first stock a pond and you stock it properly, you're giving the food chain a chance to expand. So what happens is you stock your forage fish and they expand over time, and here we go, then we stock the predator fish. So by that time, your food chain should be like right up here. Here's your predator fish. Now we go here 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. It's kind of shaky, moving up, and then all of a sudden it starts to go like this. You get to about 2 years, and here we are, and then about 2.5 years, here we are. And then your predator fish, and largemouth bass is what I'm talking about here, they reproduce. And when that happens, the babies start to eat the babies coming off the nest. So now your predator fish have an advantage. So this is where you need to be weighing and measuring some largemouth bass. This is typically after the 3rd year. So when that happens, you need to be paying attention to the lengths and weights of those bass, because what will happen is you'll see their growth curve like so. But when you start looking at certain size classes of bass whose growth rates level off, that's a sign to be proactive that you're starting to get bass crowded. So if you're bass crowded for more than just a few months, then those fish that are in that size range that are overcrowded, those things are going to start to lose weight. Now here's something that's real important. In order for a bass to get to be 14 inches, it's got to weigh 1 pound 7 ounces. If your bass weigh 1 pound 2 ounces and they're 14 inches long, they've lost weight. So it's important to know that. So you can start to identify when your growth curve levels off by keeping some records. Weigh and measure. If you need a spreadsheet to log that stuff in, send an email to info@pondboss.com. Say, hey, I'd like to have the fish spreadsheet so I can track my lengths and weights, and we'll send one to you. So as that happens, then over a fairly small period of time, your predator fish get to here, and your bait fish can't keep up. So when that happens, now you got to be harvesting. So we got happy water, great habitat, and the better the habitat you have, especially for small fish, most people don't think about that, then the better risk you're going to have, or the better opportunity you're going to have for survival rates of your bait fish. So habitat's a key piece here. Then the food chain, the right genetics for your area, and then a harvest plan. Pond is like a garden. You need to harvest it at some point. So there you go. So that's the key things there. So that's about overcrowded bass. Let me see what's going on here. I'm going to scroll up here and I'll circle back on that topic. All right, let's see. Jim Norquist saw it as well. In the path of the clip. Yeah. Tom Davis. Fish were biting the same. So you went fishing during the eclipse? You're the man. Hey, there's Frank James, Shreveport. I'm thinking of asking my new pond owner if I can lease the opportunity to fish the place from time to time. That's a great idea, especially if they understand the value of harvesting fish and they're not willing to do it. Daniel Powell got a place in East Texas. He says, how many fish do you need to measure and weigh to consider your data a good sample of a pond? Starting to use your Excel document to monitor our catches. A 60-acre pond. Well, you know what? For a 60-acre pond, Daniel, I'm going to tell you, if you can log 30 lengths and weights a month in April, May, and June, that's probably a pretty good data point. Now, you need to catch enough fish to see the trends. So if you can fish for some small fish, fish for some big fish, fish big, fish small, fish intermediate, and then weigh and measure. And when you start to plot those numbers on that graph, it's going to jump out at you as to which size class of fish are underperforming or they're the ones that are overcrowded. Now, here's the thing about a bass crowded lake. 99 times out of 100, the majority of the bass are 14 inches and smaller. That's what happens 99 times out of 100. Because people don't know, catch and release is a big deal. People still think that eating a bass is like eating a family dog or something. I don't get that. They're pretty good. I like them in ceviche, or as ceviche. But the more fish you catch, the better data points. On a 60-acre pond, I'd also recommend you guys pitching in some funds and having electrofished. And that's going to give you a really true shot, give you a really true snapshot of what's going on at that point in time, especially if you do it in the springtime or in the fall. So that's pretty important. First of all, in order to figure out that your bass are crowded, you got to catch a bunch. I was looking at the lake in Amarillo, Texas, north of Amarillo just a little bit on Saturday, and that landowner, he's 83 years old and he's a hoot. But he'd owned a piece of property east of Amarillo near McLean, Texas, a long, long time ago. And he said, man, our catch rates were great. We always caught a lot of fish. My friends love to go. And I just want this lake to be that way. Well, and I said, so did you ever eat any fish? He said, oh, no, we always threw them all back. Well, that's probably because it was bass crowded and there wasn't much food and they were hungry, So, let's see, Scott and Leah, what kind of substrate do golden shiners spawn? Should I mess with adding them? Uh-oh, I scrolled up. Should I mess with adding them to a bluegill forage pond or just stick with the bluegills? You know what? Where you guys are in Beggs, Oklahoma, and you got a few years under you with that pond, having a few golden shiners probably is a good idea. Now, here's the way that works. They spawn on grass. So if you got like bushy pondweed, or if you've got, some terrestrial grass that laps into the water at the surface, they like to spawn around the edges, and they like to spawn on grass. That's what they like to do. And if you don't have any substrate, one of the things that I do, especially when we stock threadfin shad, is go get some square bales of coastal Bermuda hay and break them up into small pieces, and just pitch them out, let them float. They'll absorb a bunch of water and finally begin to sink after they get deposited up close to the shore. And golden shiners will stick their eggs. Bluegill is still the backbone of the food chain for bass bluegill ponds. Frank James, we get along well, but I don't think it's right just to ask if I can fish there for free. Is there any general standard for leasing, or is it totally random between you and that landowner? And I would put it in writing. Hello, Steve Thorburn. Good to see you. Doug Biggs. So I don't want to just blow past that. Frank, when you get along well, one of the things that you ought to do is buy him a subscription to Pond Boss, give him a bunch of your notes, and educate him on pond management, and then visit with him about his management goals, and then offer to help him with his goals. And then don't just go out there and just do what you want to do. Just keep some records and let him know, hey, I caught this, here's some pictures. Communication is really the key for that. So I think the standards for leasing depends on what the agreement is between you and the landowner. If he bought that place, he probably can afford it. So I don't know that he needs a couple $100 for a lease, So I think the value, Frank, here's the deal. You have a vast amount of knowledge, dude. You soaked this stuff in for a long time. You can be his mentor for that. And then you can help prove up what's going on by providing him some data and helping him manage it. That's the lease I would go for, is say, hey, maybe you need to fertilize. Maybe you need to buy him some feed. I don't know. I would visit with him and just talk about it. Let's see here. Doug Biggs. What's the quickest way to get your bass crowded 4-acre pond back to where it needs to be? Can you remove enough through it while electrofishing? Depends on the time of the year. Typically, yes, you can. Typically, you can remove enough bass via electrofishing in a 4-acre pond. And the quickest way to do it is electrofishing. Electrofishing is random, and you're going to spend some money on it, but what's it worth? What's the fishery worth? That's part of how you get to answer that question. So the question is, the quickest way to get your bass crowded 4-acre pond back to where it needs to be, electrofishing. That's a good one. And yes, you can remove enough while electrofishing, depending on the configuration of the lake and how deep the water is and what time of year you do it. So you got to keep in mind, you can only electrofish down about 6 feet. So yes, you can. Yes, you can. Doing it by angling works, but you're talking about for a 4-acre pond, you're going to remove at least 120 bass before you can even start to see a difference. And that doesn't really give you a snapshot of the food chain. If a 4-acre bass pond has been crowded for 3 or 4 years, odds are high that the bluegills have pretty well been depleted. Bluegill lifespan 6 to 8 years, and if all the babies get eaten every year for 5 or 6 years, your bluegill that are left are kind of on the last legs. So the electrofishing can not only help you harvest some fish, it can help you assess and see what you really need to do besides the obvious of harvesting fish. Now, with the bass crowded thing, the more bass that you harvest and reduce the numbers of mouths, then you're going to have more bait fish, more bluegill begin to reproduce with better survival rates. And that's the objective. So the other thing to do is, what can you do with that 4-acre pond to make sure your bluegill are growing better and reproducing better? Do you have enough spawning beds? Bluegill spawn in craters and colonies. Do you have that? Do you have some sandy flats and water, gravelly flats and water 2 to 4 feet deep? And if you don't, add some. That's kind of a fun project. Add some spawning beds. Now, what I like to do there is find the flattest spots, and if it's mucky, put down some geotech cloth. Now, it's kind of hard to do that because it wants to float sometimes. But once you get all the bubbles out of it, roll it out underwater. Don't roll it out on top of the water and then try to sink it. But then sink it and put pea gravel. 3/8 inch washed pea gravel is the best. Some guys like to use crushed limestone. I don't. It's abrasive. When the bluegills start running around in circles building their nests, then they can often get cut up. I've seen that happen. So there you go. And I'm going to hit these other 3 scenarios, or other 2 scenarios here in just a minute. So let's see here. Awesome, thanks. My son-in-law caught 26 bass in an afternoon 2 weeks ago. Caught a 6'6", 6'2", 5'5". Dude, average, you know what? I don't know how it could be much better than that. That's probably not bass crowded. But the more lengths and weights you get, you know, on a day like that, you caught 26 bass. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 7. 7 of them were the best. And out of 26, they averaged 2 points. That's enough to get you a pretty good data point start, because there's going to be a bunch of, looks like 12 to 13 inch bass in that creel you got there. Yeah, that's really cool. That's a good day. Steve Scharf, I've been talking about you, buddy. You might have to rewind later on. But I've been talking about all these scenarios. I've made it through 2 of them. Danny Mack, have you ever seen an electrofishing rig for a 1/10 acre pond? Yeah, I've done it. I had 2 1/10 acre ponds, and I used to shock them all the time. As long as you get the boat in and out, out's better than in. You know, you can get a boat in any pond pretty much, but getting them out, not so easy. There's Virgil Meyer checking in from Iowa. Doug Biggs, perfect information. Wow, that's pretty nice. All right, so let's talk about that other situation. Let's talk about overcrowded bluegills. I don't see overcrowded bluegills much in the south, southwest, southeast. That's typically in northern tier states, and it goes back to the fact that bluegill don't spawn as many times in northern tier states because they don't have the same growing season. You know, here in Texas, we've got 300 perfect bluegill growing days throughout the year. You know, they start in March and they go all the way until the end of November, and I'll even see a bluegill spawns usually in the wintertime when we have a few bluebird days and the air temperature gets to 80. And when that happens, then the bluegills nest for a few days, and all they need is 4 or 5 days of water temperature in the upper 50s, and there they go. You know, and they'll do it. And so the thing is when they reproduce a lot, then their growth rate's sluggish. When they reproduce not so much, then their growth rates are really fast. So like in upstate New York, for example, I was working on a project there back in 2004 and 5, 6 through that era, and almost every pond there had overcrowded bluegills. And it was because they didn't spawn until about the 1st of June, and they grew really, really fast because there was a prime plankton bloom. The predators weren't, I mean, there were a number of bass, but they were all stopped at 12 to 14 inches long. They looked like cookie cutter carbon copies. And those bluegill grew so fast, and by the time the lakes vegetated, you know, and so the survival rates were high, so its growth rates were high, and they'd get to be 4 to 5 inches long, and that's where they'd sit. So we'd have to have fishing derbies to go out there and help people help catch a bunch of bluegills and remove those. So crowded bluegill situations, how do you rectify that? If you can figure out that you do have crowded bluegills, then keep in mind bluegills are nest raiders. I mean, they'll even eat young of the year bluegills. They'll eat baby bass. They'll eat baby shiners. So once they get to that point that they're overcrowded, they can sure arrest reproduction. You know, and in a handful of times I've seen that in the South, we rectified it. And the reason it happens in the South is typically when people stock the bluegill, the timing on when they stock bass gets missed. And there was one circumstance that I saw last year over in Mississippi where, and I wrote about this in Pond Boss. So the bluegill spawned 3 or 4 times, and then the bass were stocked really too late and too hot. And it was in July, and little bitty bass, and either they didn't make it because of the stressful temperatures of heat, or the bluegills ate them, because there were quite a few bluegills that were 5 to 6 inches long by that time. So we had a crowded bluegill situation. Well, that was easy to fix because once we figured out that the bass were not there, and we electrofished that lake, not one bass. Even though they were stocked, I think the owner stocked 1,600 little fingerling bass about so big in July. So that fall, when nobody was catching bass, the electrofishing boat went over there, and I went over there and met the electrofishing boat, and we shocked it, not one bass. So 3 weeks later, they brought over some 10 to 14 inch largemouth bass. That solved it. So those bass, there were enough young bluegills because they were spawning enough. They had not reached density yet to where they were getting overcrowded enough that they would not spawn as much. Those bass grew like crazy, and man, they look like what Ray Scott used to say looks like Alabama deputy sheriff. Really big, chunky, and they're packing heat when they're that big. So that was the way to solve that, So the other scenario is balanced, balancing. And remember, this is a great analogy, not just because I made it up, but it works. It's a teeter-totter. Balance, as biologists in college, we're taught, when we're working with natural resources, to seek balance. You got rabbits, then you got coyotes. If you got rabbits, coyotes, rabbits. Oh, get rid of coyotes, there's more rabbits. We're trying to seek that even keel. And I'm going to tell you, doesn't happen. Well, if it does, it's for a few minutes because both those sides are trying to gain an advantage. And when the bass get to the point that they're so overcrowded then that the bluegill can't keep up, that's when a pond starts getting in trouble. So there you go. There's that. Hey, let's take a minute. Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date, especially with inflation, and it lasts a year. This is the current issue. I've just about got the May, June ready to go to the layout guy. As a matter of fact, I'll have that one done here in a couple of days, and there's going to be some really good articles in the May, June issue. They've come out of the woodwork. I mean, I've got people sending me articles, which I love. If you guys want to write a story for Pond Boss, just email me at info@pondboss.com and we'll talk about it. So that would be pretty darn cool. Jeremy Day just pointed out something I hadn't thought about, but I do have an online Pondology. It's at pondboss.teachable, I think. And all this stuff I'm telling you about, you can also find that on the Pond Boss website. That's a great resource for you. Pondboss.com, then plus our social media pages. There's a lot of good information out there. And the online Pondologies, and Jeremy knows because he did it. There's like 22 videos. And if you want to buy into that, it's $495 for all of them, or there's 6 different modules that you can dial into. I want to thank our sponsors, Purina Mills. I love Purina Mills. I've told this story on the show before how back in 1995 we sent them a letter. We were ready to take Pond Boss more national. It was regional at that point. So we sent a letter. We wanted a national advertiser in Pond Boss, offer them up the inside front cover. Well, not only did they take that, they wanted to have a meeting, and they came to Texas, and we sat down, and as a matter of fact, about 20 miles from where I'm sitting is Hammond's Barbecue joint in Glen Rose, Texas. We sat down there and talked about needs. So Dr. Gordon Ballum said, what is something that you guys need in this industry? We see this industry as one that's going to grow, and we'd like to jump in there and see if we can help. I said, we feed different sizes of fish, one size of pellet. You go to a Purina dealer right now, and you can buy 32% catfish pellets. Can you guys make a feed with like different sizes of pellets? Boy, they looked at each other, and the light bulbs were going off, and they started talking their terminology, talking about extrusion and talking about surfactants and talking about, different dyes and pellet sizes and things that they had at the different extrusion plants. And shoot, like a month later, I had a pallet of unmarked bags of fish food in my shop. And that's when Game Fish Chow was born. And from then on, Purina's worked really hard to help create some of the best products out there. Now, their distribution is not as good as it should be, so I'm being straight up. Hope the Purina guys are listening. So, but their products are outstanding, especially Game Fish. MVP. I love that Aquamax Pond MVP, Sport Fish MVP, 9 different pellet sizes, fish meal based fish food, excellent fish food. And to present that feed, Texas Hunter Feeders, Texas Hunter Products, partners with those guys in promoting each other, and I tell you this, I ordered a Texas Hunter feeder today. I sent the email at 11 o'clock. The feeder order was confirmed by 11:30, and they shipped it before 2 o'clock. And my client's going to get it up in Amarillo, Texas. He's going to have that feeder either tomorrow or the day after, and that's really darn good. So their customer service is great. So is their product, and I really like that. I haven't seen David Schneiderman pop in. Easy Docks of Texas. He's a great guy with great products. A little pricey, but you get what you pay for, right? So, and I want to remind everybody that's just coming on now is the Institute of Higher Pondology with people attending is going to be May 30, 31, and June 1. And then I've got one in October. You can see the details in the next issue of Pond Boss Magazine. Or call the office. You can call our office at 903-564-6144 or send an email to info@pondboss.com and we'll tell you all about it. We got room for about 5 more people. We'll try to keep the class to 12 or under. You know, we've got 5 people that have said they're coming, 2 that have confirmed, and I expect more guys to be coming. Jason Dodd, great way to spend a Tuesday evening watching the Pond Boss while out on the boat catching nothing. Well, you're catching some rays. Jason Dodd from Wichita, Kansas. Didn't embarrass myself with you tonight. Jeremy Day, I think you said it before, if culling bass, killing them and putting them back in the pond seems like a no-brainer to keep protein in the pond. Am I missing anything if I plan on doing that? Really kind of depends on the size of the pond. You know, if you're gonna kill them and put them back, what's going to eat them other than turtles? You know, so I tell you what Bruce Condello used to do. He used to catch those little stalker bass like that, and he would fillet them and then cut the fillets up in little bitty chunks and then turn right back around and feed those off his dock. You know, now the only thing I don't like about putting fish, there's a couple of things I don't like. There's some upsides and there's some downsides. One thing I don't like is when you throw that bass in, not all of it's going to get eaten. You know, there's going to be some fins and bones and things that don't. So if kids are swimming in there, nothing healthy about stepping on a bone and get a dorsal fin in their foot. You know, ask me how I know. That happened to me one time with a catfish. The catfish fin got stuck in the bottom of my foot when I was leased a fish farm back in the early 80s. Couldn't walk for a week and a half. The other thing about it is that I don't like is if there are any issues, you know, like if the fish are carrying a few roundworms, you're going to spread those roundworms. If one fish has already got roundworms, odds are the rest of them do too. So that's not nearly as big an issue. But if you want to kill it and put it back, I don't know what to do about that. So, Wayne ordered a new Texas Hunter feeder on Wednesday and it arrived the next day. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. They're great service. So you guys pitch me some questions so we can keep this thing rolling a little bit. I talked about overcrowded bass. I talked about overcrowded bluegill. I talked about balance. I talked about the other statuses. So better to throw them on the bank. Yeah, I throw them on the bank. You know, and I tell you what, don't do. Don't give them to your neighbor. You know, well, that's one of my little bitty. I have a few little bitty pet peeves. But when a pond ends up with a bunch of overcrowded bass, and the neighbor says, "Hey, you want some of my fish? They're free." Well, let's see. Do I want your coal bass that haven't had any food for 4 years with zero growth potential put into my pond that I haven't established the bait fish yet? Sure. No. So, if you throw them up on the shore, then you're going to be feeding the raccoons. You know, so I'd rather see you feed the raccoons than feed the turtles. Alexander Cohen, what's up, Bob? Thanks as always for educating myself and so many others. Outside of the couple of days, female bass are locked on the bed and spawning. Are they still feeding? Unlike the males who are busy guarding the nest or fry. That's a great question. Fry balls. I like that term. Those fry, when they hatch, they stay in a little tight-knit ball for a few days until they absorb their yolk sacs, and then they get more of a loose-knit ball, and they're swimming around. They start eating each other, and then the ball goes away because the fish go away. So the couple of days the female bass are locked on the bed and spawning. So here's what happens there. It's fascinating if you have a chance to watch this. I've seen this on a number of ponds, one of which is Bruce Condello's, happened to be there at the right time. But you can see these big females where the male would go and nudge them and bump them and push them right toward his bed. And then they kind of belly up side by side, and he keeps bumping her. So as her legs are coming out, he's fertilizing those eggs, and he's pushing them down into the nest and creating a little ball of eggs in the nest. And he might go get another female and do the same thing. There might be 5 or 6 females spawn in the same nest. When then the female that spawned in his nest, she'll go spawn in another one. And that's a pretty cool way for nature to keep the genetics diverse. You know, so it's not like one male spawning with one female. It's like multiples. You know, which I guess is a good gig underwater if you can get it, if you're a bass. So the question is are they feeding? When they're dialed in on spawning, they don't really get a chance to feed. Now, they're going to feed before the males do, but they're so busy with their hormones and their eggs ripening. And here's another cool fact about bass. The bigger the bass, the chances are that they're going to spawn on several nests, but not all their eggs are going to mature at the same time. So keep in mind, like a 9-pound bass may have almost 2 pounds of eggs. Not all those eggs are vasculated, which means that they're not all going to mature at the same time. So the ones that mature on the outside of the ovaries are going to come out and be fertilized and spawn first, and that's going to be happening in cycles of the full moon. So if all the eggs aren't spawned, she'll keep those eggs, go feed some, and then during the next cycle of the full moon, she'll spawn the rest of her eggs. And on a rare occasion, there'll be 3 spawns in back-to-back-to-back cycles of the full moon. Now, of course, the first ones that are spawned are typically the most healthy, and by the time those things are hatching and growing up and the next spawn comes around, that second and third spawn, the survival rates are a little bit lower because you got big brothers and sisters that are eating you, you know. And so, but will they feed? Yeah, they'll feed. They'll feed if they're hungry, which chances are they are. You know, just look at it this way. I don't know if you guys follow the Sherrilunker program with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, but OHIV is the hot spot right now. I think there's 12 or 13 or 14 Sherrilunkers that were caught at OHIV in this Sherrilunker season, which starts, I think, the 1st of January and ends like the end of April. You know, and so it ends at the end of March. Well, all those fish are caught, and a lot of them are caught by sight. But those females are not defending a nest. Now, they might be defending a territory when they bite, but they can also be hungry. You know, and those guys fishing for those big fish are fishing big. So they're either going to try to piss off that big girl and make her bite, or she's hungry. You know, and the male, all he's dialed in on is protecting those eggs until they hatch. And once that ball of fry begins to become motile, they start to move around, he'll push them up out of the nest. And then he's probably going to get ready to spawn again. And it depends on how long it takes, because it usually takes like 2 to 3 weeks for those eggs to hatch. Now, he might feed a little bit after that, but then he's going to go start the spawning cycle over again. You know, so those males may go 6 or 8 weeks with very little food to eat. You know, but the females, they'll feed better than that. They'll feed big, because I saw a picture of a 10-pound bass here a couple of weeks ago that was mostly spawned out and had a 10-inch gizzard shad tail hanging out of her gullet. Jeremy Day, just trying to think creatively. Seems like you threw those small bass and big bass will eat it. Well, now okay, so I see where you're going. And big bass will eat the small bass. They will if they can catch them. So now, if you want to do some cruel and unusual punishment for a small bass to make it food, don't kill it. Cut off its tail. Oh man, I hope I don't get any pushback over that statement. But and like what Bruce Condello used to do, he would take small bluegills, 4-inch bluegills, and he kind of cracked their back a little bit where they swam funny. And then when they swam funny, they get eaten pretty quick. But he worked at that. He conditioned his fish off of his dock. If you can find out a way to slow down your little bass to feed your big bass, then you could do that. I guess I need a big blender. Yeah, nothing better than a black bass smoothie. Add blueberries. All right, you guys, throw me some questions. I'm running out of juice here. let's see here. Okay, Steve Scharf is, I'm going to qualify you as an official fanatic. You know, trying to go back and find these videos. And then, I'll tell you what, here's a really cool story. The father of feed-trained largemouth bass in the United States of America is Theop Inslee. And I'm pretty sure he's still alive, which means he's got to be like 97 or 98 years old. He's about 5'2", and he's got a patch over one eye, and every other word starts with F. He was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service pathologist in his career for like 30 years, where in some of these federal hatcheries, if any kind of a parasite or disease showed up, he was dispatched to that hatchery to cure it. And he did that. He was really good at it. One of the things that he learned was he needed to teach some of these fish to eat. And if he could feed them in captivity and then use them as brood fish or whatever they were doing with them, then that could extend their lives and improve their fecundity. There's your big word for the day. Look that one up. Which is their ability to reproduce. So he spent a lot of time trying to figure out what these different species of fish would eat. You know, and one of the ones he worked with was largemouth bass. And so he finally figured out that he could feed train largemouth bass. So when he retired after 30 years, he bought a place north of Tishomingo, Oklahoma, and he built a fish hatchery. And he was going to get into business, which he did, to sell feed train largemouth bass. Well, he had to come up with something they would eat. And he experimented on a larger scale, you know, to come up with something they would eat. And he would puree everything from crawfish to bass to bluegill to earthworms, you know, and try to figure out what they would eat. You know, even tried egg yolks, raw egg yolks, boiled egg yolks. So he was putting together all these different concoctions, and he finally came to the conclusion that he could buy brine shrimp, hatch them out, and start the babies on that, and then puree some brine shrimp and mix it with other stuff like earthworms and things like that until he could create kind of a paste and get enough fish feeding on it. Then he could convert them to pellets. So the puree, that they've used, people still do that some when they're trying to experiment with it. Let's see here. Jeremy says, if I have fields by my pond and we use fertilizer to grow dove hunting crops, is there anything that needs to be done to mitigate the fertilizer going into the pond from runoff? Not if you use the right amount of fertilizer on the crop. So when you fertilize a crop, what your mission is to fertilize enough to feed the plants. If you overdo it, then sure, some of it can go into the pond from runoff, and then what's going to happen there is you're going to grow plants in the pond. You know, now, we don't see that nearly as much in the south as they do more in the north. I was talking or visiting with Bruce Kanye about that some time back, where he lives up near Billings, Montana, east of Billings. There's a lot of corn farmers, and the soil is porous. As a matter of fact, you get down very far, it's gravel. So those corn farmers have to over-fertilize the corn in order for the corn to get enough nutrients to grow the crop. Well, what happens is a bunch of that nutrient, which is phosphorus and nitrogen-based, ends up going down through the soils and hitting the streams down, you know, in the water table and migrating toward the Yellowstone River. And then the Yellowstone River does what it does. It turns green. It flows water on down where it merges, you know, with the bigger rivers, and ends up in the Gulf of Mexico where there's dead spots. Well, one thing Bruce has spent his career on is trying to extract phosphorus from that water up there using plants in his floating islands. So that's really a pretty interesting deal there, you know, because it takes, I think 3 or 4 pounds of phosphorus, what did he tell me, would be converted into over a ton of plants. You know, that's a lot. So it's really hard to extract it. And so today's world, you know, a lot of the guys are trying to use alum or some of the other products to flocculate that phosphorus, get it out of the water, and sink to the bottom. What is your recommended DIY cover structure for an existing pond, both dense cover, fry, and bigger stuff for the game fish? So, Daniel, what I like to see there is think about this. If you've got a spawning bed, you know, where you know the bluegill are spawning, then right around that area, if you've got some good native aquatic plants, that's not even a DIY deal, that's a nature does what nature does deal, growing some plants. That's perfect nursery habitat. If you don't have that, and you can build some brush piles, think of the density like of a Christmas tree or a cedar tree. Now, if you're going to add some cedar trees, figure out how to make them stand up. Put them in buckets, concrete them in, make them stand up. They'll last a lot longer. I've put cedar trees in ponds where we just pushed them over the side of a boat, had about 10 tied together. 3 years later, they're gone. All the small limbs are gone, the needles are gone within 18 months, and they're sunk in the mud. So you're looking for something dense for fry. So that's brush piles. You know, that could, I tell you my favorite is rock piles. If you've got rocks that are, say, the size of baseballs to volleyballs, and you could build a pyramid, looks just like it looks when it comes out of the dump truck bed, if you've got some underwater points, you can surround it with rocks. Rocks are great. Riprap rocks, perfect. They love that. Bigger fish like fluffy. Like just look at like an oak tree that's 10 inches in diameter in the trunk, and it goes up 10 feet. Then the branches branch off. If you can take that tree and cut it off, or with the root ball, and cut off all the small limbs less than 1.5 inches in diameter, and lay that thing at a 45-degree angle going down into water 10 or 12 feet deep with the canopy coming up within 3 feet of the surface, you've created great black bass cover, largemouth bass cover. So when you're creating habitat, look at it like you'd look at an underwater community. It starts with the spawning beds. That's where everything starts. Then places for the tiny fish to hatch and hide. That's dense. Then as the fish get bigger, less dense. They need to be able to navigate through it. Looking at this lake that I looked at on Saturday, they're in the middle of doing their habitat plan, doing a pretty good job of it. Except for one thing, the cowboy that's helping put the stuff out went and bought several rolls of 4x4 inch square fencing material, kind of like hog fence. You don't want that, because not only is it not necessarily safe for the fish, you can't fish it. So when you start thinking about this structure that you're talking about, think about not only how is it going to protect my fish, but how can I catch fish out of it. You know, I see, let's see, Steve says, would you ever recommend fertilizing to try to promote a bloom to help clear the water in a turbid pond versus a chemical treatment? No, not really, because what you're asking me is, if my pond's muddy, can I clear it up by fertilizing it? Probably can't, and I've tried it a number of times, and the reason is that the sunlight can't penetrate into the water enough to take that fertilizer and convert it to plankton, then it ain't going to work. So you got two obstacles to overcome there. Trying to initiate a plankton bloom, which is really not easy to do in muddy water because there's not enough sun. And secondly, the reason the pond's muddy is probably because of suspended microscopic clay particles. Those clay particles are smaller than a molecule of water, therefore they stay suspended. So the plankton is not going to cause anything to happen that's going to make those clay particles want to flock together and then fall to the bottom. So Virgil, let's see what Virgil's got going on here. I have a bluegill raider stocking 2 years ago along with fatheads, added 200 perch and 50 walleye an acre. In the fall of that year, also added 20 smallmouth bass. Will this stock, let's see, added 20 smallmouth bass last fall. Will this stock keep the bluegill in check? Yes, they will. They sure will. Now, here's what you need to do, Virgil. Start looking at your links and start catching some fish. I mean, just go out and catch some and see what happens. Now, your perch have probably reproduced. Your walleye won't. And this 20 smallmouth bass per acre, they're probably not big enough yet. Will they keep the bluegill in check? Odds are pretty good because you've got three predators with the perch, yellow perch, the walleye, and the smallmouth bass. But I know you're feeding your fish, so pay attention to what's coming to the feeder and look and see how many different size classes of bluegills you've got. And if you start to see you've only got 2 or 3 sizes of bluegills and they're really boiling the water at the feeder, then we might need to talk. So I would not jump into the largemouth bass until you know you're ready. And the fish are going to tell you. Fish cities, Jeremy Day says. That's right. Kevin Matney. Hey, Kevin, you're the winner. Hey, you won the drawing for the Bird Dog mug. Now, it's going to be a little while before we get it because Jonathan, which Bird Dog, by golly, birddogit.com. You guys go check that out. It's pretty cool if you like to hunt. It's an innovative concept that my son Jonathan has figured out. So Kevin, email info@pondboss.com with your shipping address. And I don't know how long it's going to be, but Leanne's got a sticky note on her calendar at the office to ship one to you. We need your shipping address, so send that. Okay, Steve Sharf, it's a new pond. Still trying to get plants established and grow some grass on the bare areas in the watershed. Dick Tabbert flirting with the Matneys. Look at you. Cement riprap is good as rocks. I can get it much cheaper. Yeah, I like cement riprap. The only downside I've ever seen with cement riprap is the kind of water that you put it in. You know, if the pH is low, it's going to start sucking some of that lime out of the cement. And the lime in cement is not calcium carbonate. It's typically like hydrated lime or something. But I've not seen it cause any issues. Now, when you get the cement, if I'm presuming it's broken up from a foundation or a highway or something, I'd be looking to see how much metal's in it. Not so much because the metal is going to cause any issues with the water, but it's going to cause issues to fish it. And you may want to just get a grinder and grind some of that metal off. So there you go. Well, hey, we're coming up on an hour, 7:26. I can take another question or two. I want to remind everybody about the Institute of Higher Pondology. Need about 5 more folks to really fill it out, and we can have a whole lot of fun, and I promise you it's worth it. It's worth it. So, it's Elena's birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Elena. Happy birthday to you from the Pond Boss. We love you, girl. Keep it going. Keep doing what you're doing. I love how you're growing up. Heck, how old are you now? What's your birthday? How old are you now? About 13 or 14? You got to be getting there somewhere like that. Are you a teenager yet? All right, let's see. Jeremy, you're the best. Bob, hey, thanks. Steve, you're welcome. So, guys, I'm going to wrap it up right there and call it a day and see if I can round up some supper around here somewhere. Maybe a salad? I don't know. What you think? You know, I'm not quite sure where I'm going to be next Tuesday, but I kind of got a good feeling I'm going to be hanging out with you. So, Jason Dodd, 2 Texas Hunter feeders in 7 days ago, fitting MVP, water temperature 62 degrees. Only thing I see is minnows. If you put it in there 7 days ago, probably another week, and then the bluegill will start to find it, and they'll come. So, hey, thanks, everybody. So long for now, and adios until next Tuesday.